Welcome to the Great Loop Radio podcast, brought to you by America's Great Loop Cruisers Association. We're dedicated to sharing Great Loop information and inspiration with those actively cruising, planning for, or dreaming about a Great Loop adventure. I'm Kim Russo. I'm the director of AGLCA. Today, my guest will be Jeremy McConnell. Jeremy is the general manager of Northwest Creek Marina, which is an AGLCA sponsor. They are an Oasis Marina. And Jeremy has a very deep level of experience with safety on the water, and I'm going to let him explain a little bit about that to you. Before we officially bring Jeremy in and get started, I want to take a moment to recognize and thank our Admiral sponsors who support AGLCA at the highest level. They are Curtis Stokes and Associates, Great Loop Yacht Sales, Passage Maker Trawler Fest, Skipper Bob Publications, and Waterway Guide Media. As always, we encourage our listeners and viewers to support these businesses that support the Great Loop. And with that out of the way, an official welcome to Jeremy McConnell. Jeremy, thanks for being here today.
Hey, how's everybody doing? Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we're excited to have you here. And as I said, you're the general manager at Northwest Creek Marina. Start off, tell us a little bit about where that is for those who aren't familiar yet with Northwest Creek.
So we're in beautiful Eastern North Carolina. We're in the New Bern area. We're about 5 nautical miles south on the Neuse River. Eastern North Carolina is a beautiful place, kind of an untapped resource. It's got a ton of history. New Bern itself is a 300-year-old town with a ton of history that's within it. I know a lot of your loopers definitely try to make the trek up the river. We're about 17 and a half miles north off the intercoastal. So, but it's a nice big wide river. The Neuse River is one of the widest in the United States, and it has a great, beautiful scenic view as you travel, up and down the river.
Yeah, and New Bern is one of those quaint little towns that is well worth the side trip. So hopefully you'll have some loopers coming to visit you.
Definitely.
Tell us about yourself. I kind of alluded to the fact that you've got a wide variety of experience in the marine industry, but you also served in the Coast Guard as your first career, I guess.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
So I'm a 24-year retired Coast Guard Master Chief. Spent a lot of time, up and down and all over the world, conducting anything from search and rescue to law enforcement to Homeland Security missions. So I had 3 different commands where driven multiple different style boats that you could be able to do, and 3 different commands operating search and rescue, law enforcement. And so you get to see, unfortunately, in my world, you saw people on their worst day. So when it came to the search and rescue side. On the law enforcement side, you help people train and become a little bit better, because Coast Guard does a lot. Not only does it do enforcement, but what it does is it specializes in making sure people understand and they have the right equipment so they can continue to enjoy their day on the water. And you avoid trying to see those people on their worst day. So came to Eastern North Carolina. I'm originally from St. Petersburg, Florida, and grew up in the water there. And once I started getting around in the Coast Guard, going up and down and all over the East Coast and in through the Caribbean, you start getting used to seeing places. I moved 12 times in 24 years, and you kind of get used to seeing different avenues and different things. So once we got into Eastern North Carolina, there was this one place that really, truly made it feel like it was home. And it was my second and first tour here. And then the second tour, as I came back, it was hard to leave. So that was when we started really talking about retirement from the service. I was eligible for retirement, and we came back and we decided to stay here, and that's when I dove into the marina world.
Yeah, well, thank you wholeheartedly for your service. Certainly a very important and not an easy job. And we certainly appreciate the enforcement efforts that can help people from having that worst day. And that's kind of what we want to focus on today. And you were kind enough to join us for our spring rendezvous and present on this topic. And these safety issues are there's really nothing more important when you're on the water, in my opinion. So I thought this would be a great topic to bring to a wider spread audience than just the 325 or so that were able to attend the rendezvous. So let's talk about, in your role at the Coast Guard, you talked about having been involved in many search and rescue missions. Obviously, that's what our loopers want to avoid. So what's the like kind of the primary thing you'd like boaters to know and to remember about staying safe when they're on the water?
Nobody ever stops when they're planning. Like take for example, when you're dealing with your loopers, you do a ton of planning that goes into this extraordinary event that you guys are trying to accomplish. And nobody ever talks about the safety side. They talk about, hey, what towns are we going to stop in? Where are we going to see? You know, what are we doing here? You have to stop and really think about what can prevent you from doing those things. And that's where I try to tackle the, safety in an emergency training style event, because it's nobody wants to talk about the worst case scenario. They want to talk about the best case scenario. So oftentimes, in order to enjoy your trip even more, is to have always look at the worst case scenario, understand it so you can be able to handle it and minimize it.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to see dangers on the water. That's guaranteed. It's going to happen. That's what it is. I mean, let's be honest. There's no driver's license requirement to
Right.
operate a boat.
Mm-hmm.
So you have those different things you have to look at. So understanding what you can do to be the best way. And one of the biggest things in all my experiences that you could be able to do is knowing your safety gear, is understanding where it's at, what it does, and what its purpose is. And if you know those three things, that'll start you on the right path to enjoying your time on the water and minimizing whatever risks that do come up.
Yeah. So let's talk about that safety gear in specifics. Obviously there are many things that the Coast Guard requires you to carry aboard for safety, some things that are just recommended just as good practice. Let's start with fire extinguishers. Hopefully everybody's got one aboard, but tell us about some of the details of the types loopers should have aboard, and any tips you might have on where to store them or how to use them.
Right. So you have different classes of fire extinguishers that you have to look at, but the one thing you always want to make sure you have on your boat is a Class B. So that's a marine rated class fire extinguisher you want to be able to have right out of the gate. And you have multiple styles. You have four really mainstays of fire extinguishers. You have water, you have CO2, you got a dry powder like a chemical type fire extinguisher, and you got a foam fire extinguisher. So the main ones that you typically see on boats like your loopers and everything else you would see would be your CO2 or your carbon dioxide fire extinguisher, or your dry powder or chemical fire extinguisher. So that goes into a lot of avenues to where you have to be able to look at, and you have to take into consideration the type of fire. So let's talk about types of fire.
Mm-hmm.
All right, you have four types of fire. You have a class alpha fire, which is your wood, your paper products, or anything to that extent. All right, that will burn. You can use water, you can use CO2. All right, anything to that those will take into consideration and will help extinguish a fire. You have what they call a Bravo fire, which is a oil-based fire. Okay, with the oil-based fire that you want to be able to look at, that's coming from your engine room, your hydraulics, anything that can come with it that has an oil base to it, and that's what you can do. That's where you want to try to use either your CO2, your chemical, or even your foam. You have a Charlie fire, which is an electrical fire. So with that electrical fire, you want to be able to take into consideration that's coming from, obviously, you're a power source. So with that power source, one of the first things you want to do, you want to secure your power. That'll help, put it out. But you want to use a water or a chemical style. All right. So with and then the last one would be a Delta fire, which is a metal fire, which a lot of your boats aren't seeing unless you have a metal boat that you would have to worry about or do. All right. So those are the things that you want to be able to look at.
So, and you mentioned, Jeremy, right at the beginning that you make sure that you have a marine rated fire extinguisher. What's the difference between a marine rated fire extinguisher and one that you might just pick up at Home Depot?
So it's going to have a nice big label on it. It's going to have a big B.
Mm-hmm.
All right. And it's going to be rated. And part of it is the container it's in, the size it would be in. Those are that's how you would differentiate from something that you would have at Home Depot or under your sink at your house. So based on the size of what you would want it to be. So those are one of the things you want to do, but it'll have a nice big B on it. It'll say marine type, and then you'll be able to utilize that.
Okay. And so if someone is, wanting to get the right kind of fire extinguishers, wanting to get the right number, this is one of the items that the Coast Guard requires boats of certain sizes to carry. And the requirements
Right.
differ by size of boat. So we can't blanketly say, go get this.
Right.
But for a 40-foot boat, let's say, what is your best recommendation on number or size and where to put them?
Well, one of the things that you're going to want to look at is when you buy that boat, you want to check the requirements of what it has, because each boat is different for the size and the need. One might say, for a particular style boat, you need a 10-pound CO2 or a 5-pound, dry chemical. It'll tell you in the specifics based on the boat style and what it is, because trawlers could be different than a sailboat. All right. So in turn, you want to take those into considerations. One of the things you always want to make sure, one, it's ABC certified. So ABC is real simple. Okay. It's the type of fire. It's real simple. Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. All right. So on those topics, you want to try to be able to do is get that type of certification. You might see one that says DCP, dry chemical, all right, protection. Okay. That is an ABC certified thing, but it also is for dry chemical. So it has those acronyms that you broke down to be able to have those on there. All right. One of the reasons that you have these different type of fire extinguishers is the type of fire, but also you want to break up what makes the fire. All right. A lot of people have heard the fire triangle, where you'll have fuel, heat, and oxygen. Right. A lot of people heard the fire tetrahedron. They got a little more fancy and they added in their chemical chain reaction that you're doing. You're trying to break up that chain reaction. But ultimately, in the end, if you stick to the three, your fire, your heat, and your oxygen, you're trying to displace one of them because it needs all three to survive. So what you want to try to do is be able to do that. So say you're burning oil, you have oil burning in your bilge, and you want to try to do it. So it needs oxygen. So you can smother, say you use a foam or a chemical to that extent. You want to it'll layer and break up and take the fuel source away or displace the oxygen that's burning. So in turn, what you're trying to do is displace that. But with everything that you have when you're dealing with a fire extinguisher, especially on a boat, it's one thing is paramount. And it is the one thing that I stressed at the rendezvous: have an escape route. You never go in and fight a fire unless you have an escape route, because you don't want to pin yourself down and let something get away. So you always have to make sure you have an evacuation point.
Great advice. Let's talk about another safety device. This one is not Coast Guard required, to the best of my knowledge. And we had a vessel safety check recently. Actually, going back to fire extinguishers for just a second, make sure you check the dates on your fire extinguishers, because we just had a vessel safety check and ours were out of date and we hadn't realized it. So we got new ones that same day, but embarrassed to say that ours were out of date. So make sure you check that.
Yeah, fire extinguishers too, they tell you, stay in the green.
Yep.
Stay in the green. If it starts leaning either way, it's always replace it.
Yes, absolutely. But the next thing, not Coast Guard required, but particularly I would say for offshore patches, it is kind of a must, but EPIRBs. So yes. Tell us what that is in case there's anybody who has not heard of an EPIRB, and how it would be used. Hopefully never used, but
yeah,
if it's used.
I mean, I can tell you, I've in my time in the Coast Guard, I've launched on an EPIRB. So, and it saves lives. It does. It really is. It's an amazing piece of equipment. An emergency, it's an acronym. EPIRB is an acronym. Emergency position indicating radio beacon. Okay. So with an EPIRB, it's based on satellite. So it's a device that you have on your boat. You turn it on, it sends a signal to it's very simple. Takes a signal, sends it to a satellite feeds to NOAA. NOAA calls the Coast Guard launches, because that is a sign of distress. All right. So they immediately launch as a sign of distress. So everybody's getting sent out, from helicopters to boats to every local agency, state agency, anybody that can help is coming out to do that. They'll be sending out urgent marine broadcasts, everything to that, because that is a sign of distress. So that's how simple EPIRBs work, though. To a satellite, to down. You use a 406 megahertz signal. It sends it up. goes up, comes down, and it's be able to do that. Now, a couple quick things with EPIRBs.
Mhm.
All right. They've grown with technology over the last 10 to 15 years. And now everyone always remember the EPIRB being that really expensive, herky device they always bang their leg on as they walk through the boat. All right. Because you want to try to put it to where it can immediately be accessible. So you want to put it right by your doorway on your way out. So if you have to, abandon ship or get off the boat, you can grab it and go. Now they're smaller. Now they've actually got them to where they're personal locating beacons, the PLBs, but they break the acronym down, and they could be able to attach to life jackets. They can be able to attach, be in life rafts in a smaller, more composite feature. And what they were doing is they're able to do that. Now, standard rule: you get an EPIRB, you buy a boat and it has an EPIRB. You're given a boat and it has an EPIRB. You're doing anything like that, you're calling NOAA immediately, has serial number on it, and you're changing that name. And you're checking to one to make sure it's in good service condition. Two, you can run a test with NOAA to make sure it provides a signal. You want to check your battery life, and you're getting it registered with NOAA. Okay, the reason behind it is the minute that signal goes up to that satellite, that EPIRB sends out a particular signal, and that signal is marked for your boat. So if your boat's, called happy hour, and you ignite it and light it off, happy hour is going off with John Smith at that, who owns that boat, and they're going off in this location. It sends out a GPS coordinate position to where it can be able to be located. The actual manufacturers have gotten better about their location. With, most people know with regular GPS signals, it could be anywhere from 100 yards in that area. That's how accurate that they were at the beginning. Now they're actually coming out with differential GPS, and they can pinpoint your location up within almost 15 to 20 feet. That's amazing to be able to provide that kind of location and give that direct signal. So now that's an immediate point to start your search area for the Coast Guard. Right. So with that happening, having that device is worth it. So a lot of people stress over it though, because they look at the pricing on it and they say, oh, that's a lot of money. Well, the one thing I want to stress to people is you buy a great homeowner policy that you hope you never use. Mm-hmm. Okay. And you have to look at it, and it's gear that could save your life, and you hope you never use it. And 99% of the people never use it. But the very fact is it gives you that little bit of comfort knowing that you can be found.
Yeah. So just a couple of quick kind of how-to on the EPIRBs. If it's an EPIRB specific to the boat, do all of them require you to physically, hit a switch when you're in distress, or do some of them automatically go off?
It depends on the make, the model, and what it is. So some of them activate when they hit water. Mm-hmm. Okay. Some of them, if say they're a part of a life raft, they're attached to a life raft, and as say the boat sinks and it goes underneath the water, they're automatically released and activated. Mm-hmm. It all depends on the make or model that what you go and purchase for your boat. Yeah. I would recommend, because loop, the Great Loop is predominantly inland. Mm-hmm. Or, in coastal waters, that if you're not up to buying that regular full-size EPIRB, then get a personal locating beacon. Get one that you can be able to attach to your life jacket. That way, if you fall in the water or something to that extent, that you still have to energize yourself, that you could be able to do, go in and do that.
Yeah. And I know the personal locator beacons do have versions that if they hit the water, they're automatic. Yes. So even if you've somehow been injured, for many of you, this goes without saying, but I'm sure that there are some people out there thinking, well, I have my cell phone, I've got my VHF, I'm good. But what I kind of want to stress is there are parts of the Great Loop that don't have cell phone coverage. You may be in the Gulf of Mexico, depending on how you cross it. You may be out of cell service for a pretty good amount of time on that crossing. Same goes with across the Great Lakes. There are big bodies of water here. And of course, an EPIRB, because it is satellite based, will still work when you're out of cell coverage. And I think a lot of us, since we are primarily inland or coastal cruisers, don't really think about that too much. So I do want to, and then the other thing is, Starlink. All the boats are getting Starlink. Yes, it is satellite based. You have to have a different plan for those offshore crossings if you want Starlink to stay connected. But B, yes, you may have satellite service, but in an emergency, do you have time to pick up your phone and text or call for help on that satellite service? Or do you want something that's automatically going to let the Coast Guard know you're in trouble? So,
Yeah.
think about those things. Do you have a rough guess, Jeremy, on a price on a personal locator beacon? Because I know
Well,
that's kind of the easiest way to go.
it's really hard to gauge. I don't like making recommendations on style or
Mm-hmm.
make or model or anything to that extent, because ultimately, in the end, to me, having one, no matter what, is imperative.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that it does. So even if you don't want to spend the money on that, at least get something. Do
Right.
something to that extent. I would recommend top of the line, do everything, because my life's worth. I would be doing that. I have top of the
Mm-hmm.
line on my personal boat just because I've been there. I've seen the worst when it's not there. So I'm going to give every opportunity because my life's important and everyone's life's important. I get that, but at the same time, look at it differently. It's like buying the right insurance and buying the right materials, and we all look at, we when we buy cars, we buy one, 5-star rated safety. We do all those things. It's just important that you buy the right equipment that it fits the need of what you're going to do.
Yeah.
If
And
there
again,
is a chance to do that.
yeah, and we hope that no one who's listening ever needs this. But I do want to add or get your thoughts, Jeremy. Um, Even if you have a personal locator beacon and it is attached to your life vest, there are some strategies I would hope that loopers can employ when moving around the boat. Because if you do unexpectedly go overboard, if there's two of you aboard and one of you inadvertently goes off while going from the fly bridge to downstairs, the person driving the boat may not even realize it
Yes.
initially. So a personal locator beacon is going to let people know where to look for you, because if he or she does not notice you are missing for a little bit of time, that
Yeah.
search pattern gets much wider. That said, do you have some suggestions on how you can avoid that in the first place?
Well,
We
there's
go ahead.
sure movement around a boat. You always let people know you're moving. Heading below, I'm moving. I'm walking outside. If you have a ladder access that to get to the salon from the flying bridge, hey, I'm moving, and it's outside. Hey, I'm moving aft. I'm going to do that. Communication is paramount. You have to be able to do that. Having them on your life jacket is unbelievably smart. Okay, just because you could be able to attach it to be able to do that. Yes, oh, they're cumbersome. Well, there's a lot of great technology that's out today when it comes to inflatables and lighter weight life jackets to be able to do that. But yeah, moving around the boat, you got to be able to communicate and let people know you're moving. So that way someone can keep an eye on you. You can be able to do those things. Trust and communicate too, to let people know, hey, I'm not feeling well, I'm lightheaded, summer heat, predominantly most of the looping is moved during the summer.
Right.
Summer heat, oh, it's cold, have the right gear on. You could be able to do that. So I would recommend just constant communication is paramount as you're moving around up and down the boats, and be able to do that, because that way you have clear line of sight and you can watch somebody to be able to do that. If someone falls overboard, you immediately, they might not know it. There's techniques to be able to transit back and do those things, but that's for a whole nother podcast
Yeah, absolutely. We could probably spend a couple
to be
hours
able
just
to
talking
do.
about
But
that.
yeah, but as you're moving, but throw one other thing in there. People are
Yeah.
looking at value, okay, and what it comes to. Think about the boat value too. All right, when you have the right equipment on your boat, as you go to, say you finish the loop, you enjoyed it, you did your time on your boat, you go to resell. You can talk to many brokers that are out there, and if you have a quality piece of equipment on your boat, that is improving the value of your boat too.
Yeah, excellent point. Let's take a quick break and play a message from one of our sponsors. When we come back, I want to talk briefly about life rafts. So we'll be back in a moment.
Did you know that every mile of the Great Loop is covered by Skipper Bob guides? Its mile-by-mile format is a great planning tool and essential at the helm. On the most popular routes and side trips, Skipper Bob covers preparation, navigation, bridges and locks, and the best places to visit. Skipper Bob guides are updated each year, and its website keeps you current with navigation alerts and cruising news. To check it out, go to skipperbob.net. Skipper Bob is a proud Admiral sponsor of AGLCA.
BJ's Cove is a free streaming radio station that is redefining yacht rock for loopers and people who have actually been on a boat. Are you bored listening to 40 songs on repeat? Do you think boaters never played Jimmy Buffett? Are you tired of people with no boating, fishing, or sailing experience telling you what is and isn't your kind of music? No worries. BJ, your first mate at BJ's Cove, has spent 60 years boating and partying on the water, and she will play real yacht rock just for you. Join us at bjscove.com to find out how to listen. We're back on the Great Loop Radio podcast. My guest today is Jeremy McConnell. He is the general manager of Northwest Creek Marina, and he is also a career Coast Guard Master Chief. So thank you again for your service, Jeremy. I want to talk briefly about life rafts because I would venture to guess that well less than half of looper boats actually have a life raft aboard. So let's start. Do you recommend them for the loop, which, as we said, is mostly an inland trip? So what are your thoughts there?
I recommend them, but I understand that with a common sense approach to have the idea that, you're inland, you'll be able to do that. A lot of people have dinghies, they're quick, accessible dinghies to be able to drop in the water, to be able to do those things. I would recommend them, but I'll leave the caveat there that it is based on what your personal experiences are. If you have a dinghy, then one thing is to have a plan. Have a plan in place about what it has to be dropped in the water, what you have to be able to do, understanding what's windward, what's leeward, where the boat's going, what kind of water depth you're in. All those factors play into whether or not to have it. A life raft is imperative and can save your life. All right, you could be able to do that because boats happen, things can happen. You blow a cutlass bearing, you pop it through a hole, there's stuff that you're not going to be able to do fast enough to be able to get down and get there, and you have to get off the boat. All right. So one of the things that you want to try to do is always make sure that you have a plan in place to be able to have an escape route and know where to go. We know this is happening. Get to the boat, get to the life raft, get to the boat, do what you have to do to get there. All right. Get there, get safe, grab what you can, like your EPIRB and, your different equipment, life jackets if needed. And then you get that life raft over the side, you get it where it's up and it's useful. You climb in the boat. All right. You try to climb in the boat, try to stay as dry as you can. So if you can get in the boat from the boat, if you can't, get off the boat, get in the raft. All right. But if you can, get in the boat where you're trying to stay as dry as you can to prevent any hypothermia or anything else like that. Yeah. So life rafts are unique. A lot of, I recommend them just because I've seen them work. I've seen people have to get in and go, and I've seen everything from an 8-man life raft with 6 or 7, 8 people piled into it, safe and alive, to a 1-person life raft, which was very unique because he actually transited down a surf line off North Carolina beach. And it was pretty wild to see as he was coming down because it was the only place we could pick him up. So one of the things that you want to do is you want to make sure, one, you have a raft for the size of the amount of people you're carrying. It has the right gear. They have coastal life rafts. They have offshore life rafts. So a lot of times it comes down to what's carried inside of it and what could be classified as response capable time. So in other words, if you're in an offshore raft, 200 miles offshore, it's a different story, especially the transit. I know that, as you leave out of Mississippi and a lot of people try to take that dart all the way down to Clearwater. That's a long offshore transit and you're almost, 100, 150 miles offshore.
Yeah.
So
for some of our listeners who maybe are not that familiar with life rafts and the different options, we used to have a sponsor who used to sell life rafts, and he would bring one of the inflatable ones so you could see how small it starts out. And he would drop it into the pool in the facility we were in so you could see what happens and how many people could get in and out of the life raft. And he'd have us practice that, which was kind of an interesting exercise. But so, how small do they come while you're storing them? Because nobody's ever got enough space on their boat for everything they'd like to bring. And I think some people look at that, well, that's just another thing I have to find a place for, but they're really not that big, right?
No, they could be the size of a duffel bag to the size of a suitcase. And even a mid-sized suitcase, I've seen them as small. I have one here that was donated to the marina that when we do our training, that is the size of a typical duffel bag that you would just, take on a weekend trip. And that is supposed to be able to hold up to 4 people. So within that life raft, you're going to, because as it inflates, your life rafts are very easy to store. They're very easy to use. They often have a sea painter that, which is a line as you pull it all the way out, 75 feet, it'll come to a red section, you get it. and you yank hard and pop it and it inflates, and it pops itself out. It's very simple to use. They do come with some outdoor casing that can be stored outside the boat on a bracket or mount. It could be, you could have it to where it's stored right there in the flying bridge if you're, as you in an area where that's often, hung out to where you could be able to do that. So, or you can have it put right off the stern or, wherever you feel is the safest spot and the most capable, but they're weatherproof casings and sealants and done. Most life rafts have anywhere from a 2 to 4 year inspection rate. So where you would then have to take it, have it, re-inspected. I know that scares some people because they are expensive, but once again, it's a safety feature that could save your life. So to be able to do that, but at the same time, they can also still work. The one that we just used this last February here in Northwest Creek was from 2008, and it popped. So that in itself just shows that even the technology that's within it from 2008 still is capable to be used in 2024.
Yeah. So of the things we've discussed, life rafts are certainly probably the highest price tag. Depending on the EPIRB, it can be a fairly high price tag. I've been asked in the past from loopers who were wanting some of these safety devices, but thought they were a little bit out of reach. Can they be rented for some of the bigger crossings? So if you are planning on doing a crossing of the Gulf of Mexico, that's, 200 miles, can you get one for a short amount of time?
That answer I don't have, because I actually went and tried to research that because I knew this question was going to come up. And I tried doing some research and I could not find anything for a rental location. That one you might be a little more specific to, contact if you're, one of the suppliers or one of the, to see if they're offering that. As far as I know, no, but it's something that's worth a question asked to maybe a distributor.
Yeah. Okay. I'll definitely look into that. And then the final thing I want to talk a little bit about is distress signals and flares. That's another thing. If you have the traditional flares, they can be expired. But talk about some of these items that are for safety and are essentially ways to be noticed if you are in trouble and waiting for help.
Sure. Well, there's 16 different distress signals, everything from a die in the water to someone waving their arms to a rapid fire of a gun to flares to you name it, flags. Everything is out there, but there's some ones that really stand out really well for both day and night. Okay. So let's talk about a couple different things that you could be able to have on your person. So with that life jacket, you got your, let's say you have your EPIRB, and then you can have a signal mirror. Signal mirrors are no more than 2 inches by 2 inches with a little hole in the center, and it's a mirror. You use it on the sunlight. That can be seen up to 2 miles away. All right. Blowing on a whistle, just having a lanyard tied to your life jacket with a whistle on it. Whistles can be heard anywhere from a half mile to a mile away. All right. So those two are really good. Other ones that you want to look at, or the ones that we'll talk about more, are your flares. You have day and night flares. All right. One that really stands out, and a lot of people don't realize how much it stands out, is that orange smoke day signal. All right. Because as you look across the horizon, we see blue, we see white, we see a lot of different things. That orange is an international orange and stands out, and it definitely and it can do something by it. So oftentimes we recommend having those day smoke flares. All right. And it puts out that big orange smoke. It will stain everything and get everything, but you don't care. You're trying to survive. Right. So at night, you have handheld night flares and you have aerial flares. All right. So of those two that you want to try to be able to utilize, both of them will work. All right. I like aerial flares. And part of the reason is because say you're on that long transit and you break down and you need to get somebody's signal, and the nearest person is 5-6 miles away. Handheld flare has a very hard, visibility can be limited because you're at the water line. An aerial flare can help get awareness in a lot better way. Most aerial flares fire anywhere from 250 to 750 feet in the air. So you can get it elevated to be able to be seen better. Highly recommend red. Okay. The reason is, think of at night, what you're seeing at night, what you're looking for, that red flare stands out. All right. Think of your environment and what you can see, and you don't lose night vision. All right. When you do that, that's a big thing to be able to maintain. If you shoot off a white, you can definitely ruin your night vision. It'll take you a while to get it back. So, but the big mainstay out of it all is this proper technique and how to use it, where, take into consideration where your wind is blowing from, what your location is. And if you see, you don't just start firing willy-nilly, oh my gosh, I'm just going to start firing them off. Someone will see me. Well, if nobody's around, you can't see. So you only do it when you're in line of sight of somebody else, or that you can at least see somebody. So it's real important that you can do that. Last thing I tell people all the time, because people hold on to them, old flares. All right. Rotate your flares as you go through. You get a new set. Hang on to the set you just replaced. And I tell people that, and they're like, well, I don't have storage for it. Well, that's fine. Figure out a way to get it, because guess what? The more flares you have, the better chance you have to survive and be found. Fire your old flares first. Okay. If your old ones, you got your trusty good ones that are up to date, get your old flares out, fire them first. And then that way you always have a backup plan to be able to go to.
That's a great idea. And, I hear people all the time asking, well, how do I dispose of my old flares? And that's the great answer. Don't dispose of them.
Yeah.
And I believe, and you're the expert, but I believe flares for most boats, for looper size boats, are another Coast Guard requirement, a single signaling ability.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be that kind of flare, but
Right.
a distress signal is required. So,
Yeah.
Jeremy, these are great ideas. Such an important topic. And I think we all have that tendency to just assume or perhaps hope or pray that it's not going to happen to us. And in all likelihood, it is not going to. But being prepared and having this equipment and knowing how to use it is just critical. So I really appreciate you being here and sharing that with our listeners today.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And thanks to everyone who has watched or listened today. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Great Loop Radio podcast. Until then, safe cruising.